Hey friends, welcome to What Magic Is This podcast, a podcast that wants to drop a very pleasant dizione into your mental well. I am joined today by a very special guest. It's somebody who I've been wanting to have on the show for such a long period of time, and I am delighted that he is here. He is a software engineer, he is a hermetic magician, he is a geomancer extraordinaire, and he makes no bones about yelling at candles. I am joined today by Mr. Sam Block, otherwise known as Polyphanes. Sam, how are you today?
I am great, and thank you for having me here. This is fantastic fun to be on a show with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Sam, I gotta say, before anything starts here, I wanted to have you on the show for such a long period of time. I'm totally excited to have you here, Sam. I've been such a huge fan of your work. I just want people to know before we jump in here, I found Sam's blog back in about late 2013. I think he had a couple of articles up there about the Greek Magical Papyri. And I was blown away by the depth that Sam had written on the Greek Magical Papyri. I want people to know before we jump in here, I think that Sam's blog is by far and without a doubt the single greatest resource of magical commentary that exists in the world right now. I really do think this.
Flattery goes everywhere.
I link to your blog pretty much on almost every single one of my topics. It's one of those things where I share it with absolutely everybody. I had somebody a couple of days ago who encountered the headless right for the first time, and they said, like, what are these nonsense words that are in here? And I basically said, here's Sam's blog on how to pronounce these words, like
the barbarous names of God.
The barbarous names. So Sam, I just got to say, your willingness to share information with people and the things that you're going through and the process that you go through is probably one of the largest influences that I have for my podcast. It really is. And just your willingness to be able to share it with people, man. You do great work, and I love every single moment of it. It's really quite wonderful.
On the one hand, like, thank you so much for the effusive praise. Like, oh my God. Like, it constantly catches me off guard when people... I'm just some dude saying things on the internet, like, right. From my point of view. Like, sure, I know and do a couple things, but like, it catches me off guard when people treat me like some high and mighty academic powerhouse. Like, I'm not. Like, I'm literally putting things online. Right. On the other hand, like, are you sure that my blog being such an influence on your own stuff is a good idea?
I remember, what was it? I think it was a recipe for making Florida water. And you go through a process in there where I believe you shake it in the hour, was it the hour of Jupiter or hour of Saturn or something like that? And I just remember Mike.
Solar. Florida water is pretty solar.
Oh, solar, yeah. It might have been the sun, yeah. And I just remember Sam takes this stuff very seriously, which is perfect because it's through not expertise, but just a way of being able to have a process behind absolutely everything that you do. I think it's very important for people that approach magic, and specifically for beginners. Thank you for all of that, Sam.
Well, the reason why I do that is, you mentioned that, I'm a software engineer, and that's true. I went to college for computer science, software engineering, and for the past 10 years, I've been a software engineer writing, complex statistical programs. And one of my biggest pet peeves, what I do, is with my users and stakeholders not telling me what it is the fuck they want to do. Like, right. They don't tell me what they actually need. And so it's always a constant back and forth between what is they want and what I need to put out. Right. The joke about software engineers that, we're just machines for turning coffee into code. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Right.
As an engineer, I'm very process-oriented, not just for myself, but for the other engineers who come after me, for the engineers who have to maintain my code, who have to debug and test my code. So they need to make sure that they understand specifically what it is I'm doing and building, and not just what, but why. So I really take that same methodology, that same focus on process and procedure, and I apply that to a lot of the stuff I write as well. Like with a lot of the rituals I write, I will... Let's say I'm doing something about the Helios consecration, right. Consecration of the 12 faces of Helios from PGM, is it 4? PGM 4, I think.
PGM 4, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. In the PGM, the Greek Magical Papyri, all it gives you is just the thing to say.
Right.
It doesn't tell you anything else about what to do, how to arrange stuff. And for me, being neurotic as I am when it comes to ritual, I need to have this stuff specifically laid out, with everything specified. And I just had to whip that up myself. So I did. I tweaked it a couple times, to really refine my process. That ritual, like Gordon White from Rune Soup,
Right.
like he's gotten on my case about that ritual because he has his own take on that ritual. He calls my version high church PGM magic,
Right.
which I get it. It's not unfair because I specify everything along the way. I do that
Yeah.
for a lot of rituals on my blog because people often get scared. Not just me, but a lot of people get scared. Well, oh, I don't know, do this or that, or should I use my right hand or my left hand? And sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. And knowing when and why it matters, that's a huge distinction. That's huge. It takes a lot of experience in discernment. And I try to make that easy with a lot of the things I write because of the focus on process and procedure in my work.
Absolutely, Sam. And it's beyond appreciated. When I was just starting out, it was a light in the darkness. And because you don't just talk about one thing on your blog, you bounce around through Trithemius to, there's not so much leukemia in there, but there's PGM stuff. It's all over the map. Every single one of the articles that you have, we need somebody like you who just basically goes through the process itself. So I'm a bit more freewheeling for sure, and I get the whole fancy Sam idea of the stuff like the Helios consecration, but you have a picture of what you've done there. People can actually see with their eyes what you've done. You have chalk on the floor and the candles and the cups, and you have everything there. So it's such a fantastic resource. It really, really is. Again, when I first started, it was because of your rituals dealing with the PGM that I was originally interested in your work. Now, you have this classified on your blog as classic Hermetic rituals. So for this episode, I think we're going to try and concentrate on the thing that really interested me about your work. I know, again, you talk about geomancy, but we talked a bit
about that.
I will not ask you when the book's coming out. I promise that.
Thank God.
When I was ping-ponging back and forth with you about what topics to talk about, we had a couple of things come up, and I was like, I don't know if that fits. And I just said, let's just go with what I would like to talk to you about. And that would be classic Hermetic rituals and Hermetic magic. Now, you replied to me basically saying, well, the words classic Hermetic magic is a bit of a misnomer, and it's not 100% accurate. So if you can, why would this be a bit of a misnomer?
Didn't I say that it's a lie?
It's a lie. I'm trying to be polite here.
So the word hermetic has so many definitions, and it's been used in so many ways that if you just have the word hermetic, it's almost a meaningless word at this point on its own.
Agree.
Some people use the word hermetic to refer to more modern quasi-Solomonic Kabbalah lodge magic systems like the Golden Dawn or the Thelema. Right. You talk to a medievalist and you're going to hear Hermeticism brought up most in the context of either astrology or alchemy. You talk to a classicist, you're going to start hearing about the Corpus Hermeticum and the Asclepius. This word hermetic doesn't actually appear in the historical record until the Renaissance period, where the first use of the word hermetic is by this one dude who says, I'm a hermeticist and a Christian. Before that point, during the Renaissance, the word hermetic was never actually used. So when we use the word hermeticism or hermetism to describe the classic stuff, like the Corpus Hermeticum, the Asclepius, the Divine Fragments, and so forth, or even the quote technical hermetica like the PGM or various astrological and alchemical texts from the classical period onwards, it's kind of an anachronism to use the word hermetic to describe those texts. It's not wrong. There is this current of Hermes Trismegistus kind of linking it all together, sorta. But the reason why I describe these classic Hermetic rituals as such, because it's probably the easiest thing to understand them by, without calling it PGM magic. PGM is the Greek Magical Papyri, which is, for those who don't know, it's a collection of a variety of Egyptian texts that were recovered from Hellenistic Egypt during the Roman Empire period, largely around the Thebes area, kind of in the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. And it's a great insight into what magicians and priests were doing back in the day. Like, these were their personal, yes, you can call them books of shadow, as it were. And it's a great resource. I love working PGM style magic. There's also PDM for the Demotic Papyri. There's also PCM for the Coptic Papyri. And they all largely have the same kind of origin, Roman period Hellenistic Egypt. They all largely have similar influences, similar techniques, similar aesthetics, as it were. Some people argue that the PCM, the Coptic stuff, is too different because, it's more Christian and it's getting too late. And not really. It's basically the same magic. Yeah, there's more Christian elements, but it's the same kind of stuff.
Right.
The reason why I say that classical Hermetic rituals is kind of a misnomer or a lie is because, it raised the question, what is Hermetic? What is Hermeticism? Yeah. And that's such a huge question.
Let that be the next question then.
Oh, God. You asked 5 different people, you get 7 different answers, 8 on Wednesdays. So, I mean, for me, what Hermeticism is this sort of religious, spiritual, philosophical, cultural milieu that happened in, again, Roman Empire period Hellenistic Egypt, as this sort of confluence of native Egyptian religion, Judaism, early Christianity, Gnosticism, Hellenistic religion, Babylonian, you name it, all these different influences and philosophies coming together and rubbing shoulders together in Roman Empire period Egypt. Whether you want to say it has an Alexandrian focus or a Theban focus or Hermopolitan focus or Heliopolitan focus, you're not wrong. I mean, they were all along the same river, and all the urban centers of ancient Egypt were more or less connected. Right. All these different influences were coming together, rubbing shoulders. From this sort of religious philosophical orgy, out came Hermeticism, or what we nowadays would perceive as Hermeticism. Right. And it's from this period that you have the Corpus Hermeticum texts, the Asclepius and related texts starting to be written and disseminated and kind of started being taken seriously. Right. A lot of modern people would, for the past couple hundred years, a lot of researchers and academics wanted to see Hermeticism, as we understand it from the classical period, to be largely a Greek thing. Right. It's a fundamentally Greek understanding of philosophy and spirituality, interpreted in a quasi-religious, Egyptian-ish kind of lens. But in more recent decades, the attitude has kind of switched to actually having more of an authentic native Egyptian origin processed through a Hellenistic Greek lens. Yeah. It's a complicated question. It really is. And I am far from qualified to answering that with any degree of certainty.
Well, let me ask this question, because this is a guy who will come up time and time and time again. Who was Hermes Trismegistus, and what the hell does he have to do with magic?
Who was Hermes Trismegistus indeed? Who knows? Yeah. So, again, in Hellenistic Egypt, you had Greek influence, you have Egyptian influence, along with other ambient cultural influence going on. And a lot of the Greek colonizers in Egypt had a habit of reinterpreting the native Egyptian gods through their own. So, Re would be Helios, sometimes Apollon, because, it's a sun god, therefore it's our sun god. So you have the Egyptian god Yahuti, or Thoth, as we will more commonly know him today. And Thoth is, a god of writing, a god of magic, a god of laws, a god of knowledge and communication. And in Thoth, they saw a lot of connections with the Greek Hermes. So they had this natural confluence of Hermes and Thoth. Hermes Thoth kind of became its own Hellenistic deity. It is Hermes, and it is also Thoth, and it is also something kind of different from both. Right. Some people interpret this to just be a distinct deity unto his own right. Other people, especially from the context of, in perspective of the Hermetic texts, we'll talk to later, interpret this to be a human teacher and prophet who is descended from, divinity, earlier Hermes, right, a couple of generations back further. So it could be one, could be both, could be all the above. Right. Who knows? Yeah. As for the name Trismegistus, it means thrice great. Trismegistus. In Latin, you might see this as a oh God, my Latin skills are failing me at the worst possible moment.
Sam is an expert in Latin.
Apparently not. But you'll see a Latin, form of the same word, literally meaning thrice great.
Yeah.
And this is actually a literal translation from the Egyptian great, great, great. So like in the PGM, you'll actually see reference to Thoth, great, great, great.
Yes.
And that great, great, great construction is actually an Egyptian language construction to demonstrate a superlative.
Right.
So big, big, big would just be how you say biggest in Egyptian languages. So great, great, great is just greatest. So Thoth the great, great, great is like Thoth the greatest. Yeah. But the Greeks and Latins, when they saw this, they heard this as thrice great. Again, not wrong, but not really a correct translation, but right. It was a different day. Yeah. So that's how we got the appellation Trismegistus for Hermes, who is really Hermes' Thoth in this context.
Got it.
And from this weird amalgam of the Hellenistic and Egyptian influence, it got interpreted in a lot of different ways after the classical period. Some people interpreted Hermes Trismegistus to be an actual human prophet, sometimes a contemporary of Moses, sometimes one of Moses' predecessors and teachers, depending on who you're talking to. As the Arabs, came into Egypt and started taking over and started building off the Egyptian body of alchemy into their own Arabic Hermetic stuff, they kept the role of Hermes Trismegistus as a human prophet, which in their religious system became synonymous with Idris, who would in other Abrahamic systems be Enoch.
Right.
So again, depending on your perspective, either a pagan prophet or an actual Abrahamic prophet, it gets complicated.
Yeah.
And then from the Arabic Hermeticists and the Arabic Hermetic tradition, especially with alchemy and astrology, that got re-imported to the rest of Europe through the Renaissance and the import of Arabic texts. Yeah. And then you have this revitalization of interest in Hermes Trismegistus as a prophet, sage, and teacher, but more of a pagan aspect. Mm-hmm. He wasn't considered an equivalent Enoch all the time in Europe, if at all. And from that context, you have this notion of like a pristine theology, right. Or a perennial theosophy. And Hermes Trismegistus definitely played a large role in that because, look at all the wonderful things he's saying that just so happens to be the exact same our patristic Christian forefathers were talking about. Right. So it's a really twisting history that goes for easily 1,500 years or more. And it's honestly such a mess. But when you think of this as still having a connection to the Greek Hermes, right. The trickster god, what could be more appropriate?
Exactly. Wonderful.
Totally didn't answer your question, but
no. It's truthfully. So what you're saying is that this guy probably never existed.
Sure. Even if he doesn't exist, even if he never existed, he still exists.
Correct. Yeah.
So I mean.
Absolutely. I think it's important for people to understand that when the Greeks eventually came into Egypt, you had Ptolemy and Alexander the Great, of course, but they needed a religion-ish in a way that looked both to the people that they were conquering, Egyptian, but to the people that they came from, which was Macedonian Greek. And from there we get the Hellenistic age, which is just chock full of some great magic. And we had a conversation before we started recording, actually via Twitter, about how people can read these books like the Corpus Hermeticum or the Asclepius, the Perfect Discourse. It shouldn't be read as a book. It needs to be tackled in a different way. Can you elucidate on this a bit more, Sam?
Yes. Okay. So this is something that's so crucial to understand about a lot of these texts. Consider the PGM. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, when we talk about PGM, most English speakers will just get out their copy of Betts. So this big black book that costs like $50-some, and that's what they'll start using for their work with PGM. That's all well and good. But that's our modern convention and our modern convenience of having all these different texts in a single volume.
Yeah.
It kind of hides and obscures the fact that these are not all different chapters of a single book. These are all different books that were put together by some miracle of editing.
Right.
So when you look at the PGM, it is a fundamental error to understand the PGM as a single text. It is a collection of texts. PGM 1 is completely different from PGM 2. PGM 2 is different from PGM 3, and so on. There are definitely commonalities between them. There are definitely similarities. They definitely happened and were written more or less in the same context, but by a lot of different authors over several centuries.
Right.
So some people who want to treat the PGM as a single grimoire, that's incorrect. You treat it as a bunch of different grimoires within each separate papyrus. The same idea applies to texts like the Corpus Hermeticum. Not so much the Asclepius. The Asclepius or the Perfect Discourse, that's actually a single text.
Right.
There is some research that says that it's actually compiled from 3 separate texts, but it's basically a single text to itself. But the 18 books, well, technically 17, because book 15 never really existed. The different, quote, books of the Corpus Hermeticum, you pull out your copy of Copenhagen, or you pull out your copy of Solomon.
Right.
It's different chapters in a single book. And again, that's a modern convenience that we have. These are actually all individual separate texts. And if you read them and you try to take each one seriously as part of a complete whole, you're going to get frustratingly confused because they contradict each other all the time.
Right.
Because, they're different texts written by different authors with different opinions. It's like going to a university department building and then listening to what each professor in their own office has to say about this particular topic. Like, sure, they're going to kind of agree on some things, but they're going to be pretty heated about some pretty significant differences in opinion.
Right.
So when you read the Corpus Hermeticum, it's important to remember that, again, it's a bunch of different texts that happen to come together by the combination of the knife of time and the pen of the editor over centuries.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the Corpus Hermeticum came together as a single collection of texts, definitely by the 11th century, maybe as early as the 5th or 6th. It's not clear, at least not to me. But originally these were not one single text, and they should not be understood as such.
So when somebody gets, say, something like, was it Pomeandres? No. Was the translation that Ficino did?
Yeah, the Divine Pymander.
The Divine Pymander. That people get that book, or at least they see a translation of that, and they're just like, I'm going to read this almost like the Old Testament. It's one big story, and that's like...
I applaud them for their enthusiasm, but they are misguided in doing so.
Right.
Honestly, don't get me wrong, Ficino's translation was monumental.
Right.
But we have come so far. We have gotten so much better at the actual act of translation. We know so much more about the context which these things were written. We have so much better evidence about what the influences are. I only ever recommend for English speakers either the Copenhagen translation or the Solomon translation.
Both
because
are excellent.
They're modern translations based on the best evidence and critical editions of the Greek and Latin texts we have. And I don't see any reason to start anywhere else. The other translations that are earlier, John Everard, Marsilio Ficino, absolutely great to also read, get different perspectives and understandings of these things. But we're just getting started, or you just what is this text saying? Right. If you don't want to go to the actual original Greek, go with Copenhagen for Solomon.
Right.
And again, for instance, as a good point, I was discussing on the Hermeticism subreddit, can human souls reincarnate as animals?
Yeah.
It's either a yes or no question. Either they can only ever be reborn as humans, or they can be reborn as humans or animals based on their behavior in this life. It's a fairly clear-cut question.
Right.
And the Corpus Hermeticum, based on the specific book of the text you're reading, will say it's one or the other. There's no one unified answer. Yeah. So if you're frustrated with the contradictions, you have to understand that it's not such the text is contradicting itself, it's that there are multiple opinions. And you just happen to be getting a snapshot of different teachers shouting over each other in a giant debate, 1,500, 1,700, 100 years ago.
Right. I think that a lot of people, they kind of hone in on this very wayward way that the Corpus Hermeticum is, and then they can just say, well, it's odd and it seems somewhat occult-ish. So I'm just going to slap the word hermetic on absolutely everything. And
Yeah, you're not wrong.
yeah, and so for me, it's one of those things where I do not use the term, I do not consider myself a hermetist or even a hermeticist because I don't even know what that means. Like, I have all the books, I've got every single one of them, and it's just like I still have to go through them, and there's just so much in there. But it is still interesting. I mean, everybody's favorite when they get the Corpus Hermeticum by Solomon, they're waiting for that. I forget the, I think it's book 17 in the Asclepius about how gods will be gone from the world, and it's this really
The prophecy. Yeah,
the
from
prophecy.
Asclepius.
And I remember getting Solomon's copy, the Way of Hermes, and just being like, where is this? And it's not in there. But
It's a different text.
exactly.
Asclepius. Yeah.
But it's, for some reason, over time, it's just been bungled up as one. It's the Hermetica. It's just the Hermetica, right?
Well, there is actually a good reason for that. Historically, so the Corpus Hermeticum wasn't really known in Europe. Like, it was kind of, quote, lost.
Right.
It was the translation work of Marsilio Ficino that brought it back into the public sphere in Europe, only in the Renaissance period. But the Asclepius was already well known in Europe. So it had already been known for quite some time. In Latin, we don't have the original Greek anymore. Even if it was written in Greek, we have a couple selections from it, from the Nag Hammadi texts, which are more or less the same, but there's still some pretty stark differences, which might indicate a different chain of transmission. But the Asclepius was already well known as being like a Hermetic text.
Right.
So it makes sense that the Asclepius would be bundled in with the Corpus Hermeticum. But again, that's mostly a modern contrivance of editing, facilitated largely by the work of Brian Copenhaver, who is basing it on the earlier work of A.D. Nock and A.J. Fasturier. So
now, you talked a little bit about it, but I'm just wondering if you could flesh it out a little bit about what people need to understand about the era and the area that these Hermetic texts, or even the PGM, because I think the PGM is, some of them go back as far as, I could be wrong here, 500 BC to, or 300 BC to about 500 AD. It's a bit all over the place. But what,
I would, okay, we'll get to that. Yeah.
but what can you tell us about this area? Because, as you mentioned earlier, that a lot of it has to do with Thebes in Egypt, not the Greek Thebes. A lot of it also has to do with Alexandria. And I've done episodes on ancient Greek magic and ancient Egyptian magic, where I say that ancient Egypt was the soil of the Western magical tradition, whereas the rhizomes was ancient Greek magic. But I want people to really understand here that the seed is actually a city, and that would be Alexandria. And if you can just flesh it out a bit more about these places and the time.
So I would actually say Thebes more than Alexandria.
Really?
Earlier, I would have said Alexandria because, of course, we all know about Alexandria. It was the giant port city, that connected Egypt with the whole rest of the world, or at least one of the major port cities, if not the one. But the thing about the PGM texts is that we all recovered them basically from Thebes.
Right.
Like, they all have a Theban provenance.
The Theban Magical Library.
Exactly. Yeah. There are a couple some other ones that pop up elsewhere, but the bulk of the PGM come from Theban collections.
Right.
And Thebes was a very powerful city. It was also one of the capitals of Egypt. At one point in time, if not for a large length of time, the capital of Egypt kind of went back and forth between Thebes and Memphis, I think.
Right.
So Thebes was huge, and where the pharaoh went, so too did all the priests. And the thing about a lot of priests back in ancient times is that they weren't full-time priests.
No.
They would have a set schedule during the year where it's like 6 months on, 6 months off, 6 months on, 6 months off. And during your off time, well, you still gotta pay the bills. You still have to eat. So you have all these priests kind of doing itinerant work.
Right.
And the thing with ancient Egyptian understanding of magic is that magic is religion, and religion is magic. There was no distinction between the two. So for priests being itinerant magicians, well, it's kind of a no-brainer at that point. Like, of course they're going to be.
Yeah.
But the thing about, you mentioned an interesting point that I actually want to disagree with.
Okay.
You have the Greek colonizers coming into Egypt and started the Hellenistic era, and they did make, a bunch of whole new syncretic deities like Serapis kind of mingle and combine what they considered the best of Greek stuff and the best of Egyptian stuff. But the native Egyptians didn't give a shit.
Right.
Like, native Egyptians were proud motherfuckers.
Yeah.
They're like, we don't want any of your weird Greek shit. We don't want any of your Roman shit. Like, we're happy being Egyptian. We're happy staying Egyptian.
Right.
They didn't really want any of that kind of stuff. In order to move up higher in Ptolemaic society, yeah, you did have to get in with the Greeks. So yeah, some Egyptians did, especially if they intermarried or if they were descended from, some Greek lineage. Sure, they would have a close affinity to the Greco-Egyptian stuff. But by and large, the native Egyptian populace did not care.
No.
So you have these priests who are trying to make money. Well, they're not money given the economic climate, which was not necessarily money-based given the tight
They
reign.
needed to eat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're going to go for both. You're going to help whoever comes along. And for some people, well, you're going to take one approach, while others can take another approach. And yes, obviously Greek was the lingua franca. Because Egypt was a crossroads of the ancient world. So you did have people coming from all over, as far east as India, as far west as Spain, as far north as Scotland, as far south as, I don't even know how far south in Egypt was, at least as far as Nubia.
Right.
The lingua franca there was Greek. So it does not surprise me that a lot of the magical texts were written in Greek because everyone spoke Greek.
Right.
But you also have the Demotic stuff, which is Egyptian.
Yes.
Same with Coptic. Coptic is just Egyptian, written using essentially Greek script. So you have all this native Egyptian stuff for native Egyptians using a lot more, native Egyptian mythology, native Egyptian theology, native Egyptian techniques, as opposed to the PGM stuff, the Greek stuff, where it's a lot more of a mishmash.
Right.
So you do see a lot of the syncretic stuff with the PGM, but it's virtually absent in the PGM, even if they're contemporary.
Yeah.
So you have all these people rubbing shoulders and all these influences coming together. And it was a lot more freewheeling back then.
Yeah.
Like nowadays we like having clean Aristotelian separations and categories of things. Like you either one or the other.
And it's appropriation if you do anything outside of that.
And yeah, there are issues of appropriation throughout time and history, largely with appropriation from mystery religions.
Yeah.
Like, if you were in the Eleusinian Mysteries, you didn't say shit about what happened in the Eleusinian. Like, you were under penalty of death.
Yeah.
No questions asked. But beyond that, like, you have some rituals that call on barbarous names, which can be traced back to Egyptian deities who sit in front of the lamp of Jerusalem. Like, what? So, like, it was just naturally syncretic because that's just the natural approach that a lot of humans have throughout cultures. They see power, they're going to tap into that power. Like that's what we magicians just do. So that's kind of like the underlying, I don't want to say motive, but that's one of the main mitochondria of the PGM cells, as it were.
Right.
You have a lot of different influences coming in all at once, and they want to use what worked. And it turns out there's a lot of that.
Yeah. Although I've covered the PGM to an extent in an earlier episode that I haven't, I actually reached out to you and got a wonderful response that I read during the episode. What you do on your website, the Digital Ambler, is, as I mentioned, you go through the process of things. One of the first ones that I think really, really caught my eye, and I don't know, I think maybe you wrote it in 2014, but it was the heptagram, right? Which was it's an invocation of Ion. There's the Helios consecration. But what initially sparked your interest in the PGM and Hermeticism, would you think?
Oh, God, what did? So, as far as Hermeticism in general, it would be, of course, the most obvious answer that anyone can guess about me, geomancy.
Right.
Yeah, I started picking up geomancy back in college, so over 10 years ago now. And of course, there were connections with astrology, which is, the Hermetic art, bar none.
Right.
Like, I don't care what the alchemists say, it's astrology that is the Hermetic art. It is the oldest Hermetic art. Yeah. It is the primary Hermetic art. Right. Alchemy is nice and all well and good. Like, total respect to the alchemists out there, but it's really astrology. That's the Hermetic art, let's be honest. So, when geomancy grew up in Europe, it grew up alongside in the shadow of astrology. And so in order to get a better grasp of geomancy, I really started to tap into, medieval, Renaissance, Western European astrology, which started leading me, encountering more and more references to Hermes Trismegistus. So I, went for the source, went right for the Corpus Hermeticum, and I had a copy of that back in college. read it a couple times now and then.
Yeah.
As I studied, under Father Rufus Opus in his rhetoric course, he also referenced the Corpus Hermeticum and number points, which helped inform my basic, cosmology. And then as the years go by, I keep turning back to it. I keep flipping through it. I keep learning from it because it's this really dense text, not going to lie.
Yep.
But as far as PGM stuff, I would probably have to say, again, it was Rufus Opus's course. And just, the general blog current that was going on, the general occult blogosphere that was happening, in the early 2010s, which was like a whole phenomenon into itself, which is slowly starting to come back, I'm noticing, which I'm really happy about.
Me too.
Through his rhetoric course, he brings up the headless rite. Again, obviously because, the Thelemic influence that Rufus Opus has, the Liber Samic, which is just a modern redoing of the headless rite from PGM5.
The bornless rite, right?
Yeah, Liber Samic, the bornless rite. Yeah. That's kind of got me started, and I started looking up similar texts. Like, there's one text which I won't even deign to mention anymore because it's just not worth it. There's Tony Mearswicky's Greco-Egyptian Magic, which is also a good resource.
Right.
But they're all kind of modern pluckings of the PGM. It's like, here are some of the rituals, and here's my modern interpretation and overlaying of modern understandings of a culture on these original texts, which is all well and good. Not saying it's a bad approach. It is totally a valid approach. I read them as, informed by them, but I decided just to skip most of them and just go right for the PGM source itself. And that's why I just decided to get a copy of Betts and just go to town.
What was your first impression? Because I'm curious to know myself.
Gosh, this is dry.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say that. They're really, really good rituals, and some of them are still very applicable. Admittedly, some are difficult to do. Sometimes they call for drowning a cat in milk, which is a little weird. Not gonna lie, I haven't done that one, and I don't plan to.
No.
But a lot of rituals, they just seem pretty run-of-the-mill magical. You do this song and dance, you say these weird words, and then, a god appears.
Right.
Oh, wonderful. Or, you inscribe this on a little bronze tablet, you stuff it your opponent's shoe, and they trip over at the races. I love it. So it's still just magic. You see the same stuff in the PGM you see in any grimoire or any collection of spells. Because, fundamentally, yes, these rituals are 15 to 2,000 years old. To my point of view, fundamentally, humanity has not changed in its 60,000 years and more of being around. We still have the same basic needs. We still all eat, sleep, shit, fuck, die. We still have the same basic needs to, get laid and get paid. So all we see in the PGM is just another expression of these basic human needs calling out through a marginalized magical means to help us out more.
Right.
We do see a large amount of theurgic stuff in the PGM, absolutely. And we'll see a large amount of thaumaturgic stuff in the PGM. We have this mix of high magic and low magic, divinity stuff, and just crass, I want this girl to, fall in love with me. I want her to meld her pudenda to my pudenda, which is such a line. I love it. So, it's just a collection of spells.
Yeah.
But I think what really got me hooked was this definitely the higher minded theurgic stuff that kind of really got my attention. The invocations to Ion, the really elevation stuff, the spiritual ascent kind of stuff. Right. And that's largely what my practice has kind of been focusing on. Obviously, I do use some of the other thaumaturgic low, quote, low magic shit.
Right.
But I do like doing the higher stuff as well. And it just feels nice. I like the really old-timey look of it.
Right.
Don't be wrong. I do magic because magic works, and magic, helps me in my life to reach higher states of existence and being and closest to God. But also, let's be honest, so many of us get into magic because it looks cool and it makes us feel cool. There's nothing to be ashamed about that.
No, absolutely not. On that note, as you mentioned, the rituals and the rites within the PGM, they're 1,500 to 2,000 years old. That's a chunk of time. Why do you feel it is important to do this kind of magic in 2020 or even 2021 or even in the future?
I like it.
Yeah.
It works. That's it. I don't think this is the best kind of magic. No. I mean, all these different traditions and schools and systems are all different tools. They're different toolboxes, I should say, with each individual ritual or each technique being an individual tool in the toolbox. And sometimes one toolbox may be all you need. Sometimes you need multiple toolboxes. Like if you're building a house, you can build a house with just a carpentry toolkit. Like totally possible.
Right.
But if you want plumbing, well, you might need a plumbing toolkit as well. And the carpentry toolkit may not be the best thing for you.
Yeah.
If you're trying to build an electrical system, you might need an electrical toolbox for that.
Right.
And they're all different tools. So like for me, obviously I have my hands in a lot of different pots all the time. But my primary go-tos are my Hermetic stuff, which includes a lot of PGM stuff, Lukumi, so Afro-Cuban Orisha worship, 'cause I'm an initiated priest in that. General spiritualism stuff, working with my dead, working with spirit guides, a little bit of saint bothering. I have my Hellenic shrine to Hermes and Apollon and Zeus and so forth. And depending on what it is I need to do, I might have only one option open to me. I might have multiple options open to me. And I'll just see, hey, I have my multiple options. Dead guys, do you want to take this? Nope. Okay. Planetary angels, you want to take this? Okay, we'll go with that route.
How do you discern what you use?
Sometimes it's a gut feeling, or maybe just, I feel like doing it this way today.
Right.
Or someone's like, hey, dead guys, do you want to take this job for me? I'll just do some yes-no divination, or just check with them, like, we'll pass this time. But thank you. It's like, it depends on what it is and what approaches. Like, if I'm just kind of doing something on my own, maybe I don't need to check in with anyone. Maybe it's like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to invoke this power, this planetary energy, and just, yell out a candle for a bit and then be done.
Right.
Or I might want to go like, well, this requires a more delicate, intricate touch. I might need to plan this out a little more. And then I'll start investigating which is the better approach. Do I have an actual tool that's ready-made for this kind of situation in this toolbox? If so, I'll just use that. If not, I might need to mix something up or kind of combine elements depending on what can be combinable. So it depends. It really depends.
I've passed this article on to so many people just because they always ask, like, 'cause it's almost like people when they start with magic, they think that just reading a book can get them the skills that they need to become a magician. And I have to say, pump the brakes there. There's a couple of things you need to get first. And you did an article on psychometry, which is, I think, maybe one of the greatest things you've ever written. And if you can, in your way, how would you explain because you mentioned getting a pendulum and trying to figure out what magic you want to use, how would you explain psychometry to somebody who's totally new at magic? Because I think most people starting on magic have no idea what it is.
So a lot of us occultists interact with a lot of immaterial forces and entities. We cannot rely on our physical senses in order to interact with these things. Some people do have a strong enough spiritual sense that they can actually use their eyes to see energy, like how I'm looking at my camera, like how you're looking at your screen.
Right.
Or, their spiritual hearing is so strong, they hear it clear as day, just like you're hearing my voice in your headset.
Yeah.
But most people don't have that.
No.
And that's fine. Not everyone does. Not everyone needs to. But in order to interact with the spiritual immaterial world, you have to build up your spiritual immaterial senses. Psychometry is the art and practice of getting a read off things, actually getting vibes, as it were. For instance, most people, when they're buying a house, like real estate agents will tell you this, like this is a thing that happens. People will know upon walking to a house if someone has died there.
Exactly.
Like they get something, like something wrong has happened here.
Yeah.
It can't really be explained. It's just something they pick up on. That is fundamentally what you're doing, but in a more general sense. Death is a huge thing. So it's a lot easier to pick up on death than like, oh, this person likes playing Tetris on their phone a lot. That's a very subtle detail that it's more difficult to pick up on. But it's that ability to pick up on those things. For instance, if I'm at a party and I want to spook someone out, like, hey, let me see your earring for a bit. I'll hold their earring. They'll give me their earring, kind of look at me weird, like, what are you going to do with that? I must hold their earring in my hand. I'll say, you write a lot at home, but you write when you're crying. You cry when you write a lot. And you always kind of go to bed drunk a lot of times, but not always because of drinking necessarily. And they'll stare at me going, how the fuck did you know that? Because I see these things,
Yeah.
I'm reading the energy that they put onto that earring because they happen to wear it, or they happen to, have it on their body or near them a lot of times when these things happen. My sister, on the other hand, will do the same thing, but she'll get more emotional information as opposed to actions, like what I perceive on. But either way, we're kind of tapping into the same thing. We're getting a read off these vibes, these energies, these impressions that we leave on things etherically. And that is fundamentally, I think, the most important thing to getting started in so much of the stuff. Because so much of this is based on, if not communication, it's based on perception. Like, if a spirit is trying to talk to you, how can you listen to them if you can't hear them? If a planet is trying to show you something, how can they show you anything when you can't see what they're showing you? So, psychometry is the practice of actually perceiving things spiritually. And whether or not you're doing spiritual mediumship or conjurations of angels and demons or just, Reiki, whatever, you need to be able to understand how these things work. And in order to understand how they work, you have to be able to see these things to see them working. And so, like, definitely the psychometry article is one I share a lot for beginners as well, because, like, it's how you start.
Right. It's something I try to tell a lot of people as I go through things on my Patreon, because they're asking how I do magic, and I have to constantly tell them, like, look, for a lot of this stuff, intuition or psychometry is far better than precision. You have to start to get that first before you get to the precision part, because
Absolutely.
truthfully, it's just about paying attention more than anything. And I think you mentioned in the article as well, it just says you'll think that you're making it up, but you're not, right?
Yes. That is, like, so my sister told me that, and oh my god, that has, like, been, like, the one thing to carry me through so much of magic, not just psychometry, but with so much. Like, it
Everything.
feels like you're making it up, but you're not.
Yeah.
It's like the quote from La Maladicette. It's all in your head, but you have no idea how big your head is.
Right.
It's kind of like the same message there.
Right. We got to get back to the PGM. Sorry, that was just a little bit of a detour here, but I do share that article almost on a weekly basis. The old gods, do they still have any blood in them at all, Sam? Because I think that a lot of people, when there was a crisis within the chaos magic community in 2005 to about 2012, about how the thought that you could replace gods with comic book characters or with characters from J.R.R. Tolkien, that it wasn't as effective. I think as time went on, we started to realize, people that were involved in chaos magic, that perhaps the old gods still had something in them. What do you say to something like this, Sam?
So there's no one answer to this. Sometimes it's yes for all gods. Sometimes it's no for some gods. Sometimes it's no for some people trying to contact them. The thing about these rituals is that, again, from the PGM and from the PDM especially, less so the PCM, again, bear in mind these were priests doing this work. There were some non-priest magicians, of course, doing this stuff as well, and just independent people. Becky from the corner, writing this own curse how to get to bed some dude, sure. But a large number of these rituals were done by priests who, by their nature as priests, ordained and initiated and having undergone specific connections to particular deities, had an active line of communication transmission that many of us do not have anymore. Like, for instance, I'm a priest of Ogun in Lukumi.
Right.
I have a specific lineage, a sort of, quote, laying on of hands, as it were, that brings me into a specific pact that already existed, that puts me in contact with Ogun in a way that someone not initiated does not have.
Right.
That's what separates me as a priest from them as a non-priest. So I can do things with Orisha that non-initiates literally can't. Like, that door is closed until they go through that door. Some of these rituals may well have that sort of, you need this hookup in order to do it. Sometimes you can hotwire it. Sometimes you don't need a connection like that to begin with. You can just pick it up and run. So it kind of depends on the ritual. I have a lot of luck with the PGM. I know some people who just don't. Like, they can't get this to work with them at all. And there could be any number of reasons why. Maybe they just don't click with these energies and forces and names. Maybe it's just not something they can handle. But other people who are quite competent in a lot of different kinds of magic also can't get PGM to work, even though they get similar kinds of magic to work. And for them, it's like calling a phone number that's long since been disconnected.
Right.
Or it's like calling a phone number that you're trying to reach someone, but it's already been reassigned to someone else. So in general, I would say the old gods definitely have blood in them.
Right.
Like, I don't think that was ever lost for the most part. Some gods, maybe they were always minor and they decided to just, fuck off into the ether. Who knows? Given the current state of humanity and the current state of the world and how we treated it, I would not be surprised. So it really kind of does depend from person to person, from god to god. In general, if you either can forge that connection or you have an innate connection, maybe from some past life connection, or maybe it's just some natural resonance with this stuff, it might be easier for you. And like, for instance, Gordon White in his Rune Soup course on the PGM, which I definitely recommend. It's a great resource.
Yeah, it's very good.
He explicitly says that, the actual initiation process is lost. It's dead. We don't have that available to us anymore. So he hotwires one for you.
Right.
He used a particular invocation from, I think, PGM 12 to basically hotwire a connection and mock up an initiation to get you a passport of sorts into these powers, which by and large works well.
Yeah.
Like, I was already up and running PGM long before this, but I thought it was a great ritual.
Was that Agathos Daemon or no?
It's what I have in my blog as the Royal Ring of Abrasax.
Abrasax, yes.
It's another generic high and mighty floofy invocation of the highest power, blah blah blah.
Right.
But same diff.
Wonderful.
Good shit all the same.
Absolutely. You mentioned it a little bit earlier on, but I just wanted to nail this down for people because it's something that you will come across quite a bit with, say, something like the Cyrenides. But what is technical Hermetica?
Okay. So earlier we talked about the Corpus Hermeticum and the Asclepius. These are the Hermetic texts. Corpus Hermeticum just means collection of Hermetic stuff. But a large number of these that are popularly known would have been academically considered the, quote, philosophical Hermetica or theoretical Hermetica. So we talk about Hermeticism as a philosophy, which isn't really true. It's more of a theosophy, ignoring the modern use of the term theosophy. It's like a knowledge and wisdom of the divine. It is not a philosophy which has a certain set of axioms and way of understanding the cosmos, but it's a way of approaching divinity.
Right.
And so the Corpus Hermeticum does have a lot of philosophical elements, but also a lot of devout and pious elements in it as well. And so these are called the philosophical or theoretical Hermetica because, by and large, they're not that magical.
No.
That's why academia likes talking about the philosophical stuff, because it's not magical. And academia still to this day has a huge bias against the magical.
Really? What?
So with the technical Hermetica, on the other hand, or the practical Hermetica, you have the stuff that's not philosophical. You have the astrological stuff. You have the alchemical stuff. You have this, like, the conjuration of spirits and the bringing down of gods into statues. That's the technical Hermetica.
Right.
And by and large, there's not as much of that available to us in our modern day. No. Obviously astrology. For instance, Chris Brennan's work on Hellenistic astrology would be a great modern example of technical Hermetica.
Yeah.
Because it's, astrology, it's the Hermetic art. There's a lot of Arabic works, most of which still have not been translated in English because there's a major dearth and paucity of translators who are working to get Arabic and Persian stuff in English, which is a great shame for us all considering the wealth of stuff in there.
Absolutely.
But a lot of Arabic Hermetic stuff focuses on the alchemical side of things. The Picatrix, for instance, is a great example of technical Hermetica.
For sure.
It's a lot later than the classical period, like this is medieval Renaissance period stuff, but it does have a lot of survivals of classical elements in it.
Right.
We don't have a lot of technical stuff available to us, but you can get an idea of by, again, looking at the PGM. Alison Tchaikovsky, for instance, is doing great research with PGM, and she's working on really digging through the PGM in a way that expands our knowledge of what technical Hermetica would be.
Right.
Now, I would consider the PGM, although roughly contemporaneous with a lot of the philosophical/theoretical Hermetica, not to be quite the same.
No.
But it's either proto-Hermetica, as it were, or at least a good insight into the magic practices of what the Hermeticists of that day were doing.
Right.
So either way, you could consider it technical Hermetica. So yeah. Now, admittedly, the distinction between technical and theoretical or philosophical and practical is entirely arbitrary.
Yeah.
When the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, we have this discourse on the eighth and ninth, or
Love it.
Ogdoad and Iliad.
Yeah.
And it's a great, beautiful text.
Absolutely.
And that really blurs the lines between philosophical and practical.
Yeah.
Same with book 13 of the Corpus Hermeticum. It is kind of cosmological, kind of theological, but it's describing a process of initiation and purification from something low to something high.
Right.
As Hermes purges his son Tat of these torturers and tormentors associated with the zodiac signs, which they're more planetary than anything else, but whatever.
There's an article
about that. Exactly.
Yeah.
The distinction we have between technical and practical, or philosophical, it's really more of a modern academic one. Again, it's kind of an anachronism.
Right.
It's useful for us to kind of categorize them, but bear in mind that that's us categorizing them. That's not necessarily how they were categorized back in the day.
Love it. Perfect. We talked about it a little bit with such things as psychometry, but what would you say to somebody who wants to approach something like, say, Greco-Egyptian magic, which are words we haven't used before, but it relates in a way to Hellenistic magic and working with the PGM, which is the major source that we get for Greco-Egyptian magic. But what would you say to somebody who wants to approach this for the first time? Would you say something like, be patient, or...
Yes. Oh my God. So, like, from a study standpoint, I see the value in books like Tony Mirzaki's Greco-Egyptian Magic. Don't get me wrong, but I'm always pro just throw yourself into it.
Yeah.
Like, if you want a good introduction to Hermetic stuff, just get a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum and start reading. It's going to be difficult, but you'll have no better way of getting involved with it. Yeah. Same with the PGM. Get a copy of Betts and just go to town. Yeah. If you know Koine Greek, get a copy of Prizendance. The German collector of all these texts in a critical edition of the Greek, as it were, which also helps because there are some typos in the Bet stuff and bad translations that you can easily correct if you go to the Prizendance, unfortunately. For instance, a good example of a very popular misspelling is in the Headless Rite. Out, abraut, basim, isak, sabaut, yao. We say the word abraut as it's printed in Betts, but in the Prizendance, and in fact, even in the actual papyrus, if you actually look at it, it's about. There's no row.
Oh.
So, there are these little tiny misspellings that get thrown in there, and you really have to pay attention to catch them. I know, I see your face. Exactly. It's like, have I been doing this wrong this whole time? And honestly, I have too. I've been using the Abraut pronunciation for years, and shit still works.
Yeah. So
maybe the gods just thought I had a speech impediment. I don't know. Shit still worked. Now that I know better, I'm going to do better.
Right.
But, so when it comes to getting started with the Greco-Egyptian magic and the PGM, get yourself a copy of Betts, maybe a Prizendance if you can, find one online, whether it's pirated or PDF or whatever. If you want to shell out the $200, get volume 1, another $200 for volume 2, more power to you. Right. They're not, academic books are a scam, swear to God.
Yeah.
But just get yourself a copy of Betts, start reading, and just start thinking, well, I can use this ritual for this situation in my life, or I have this situation in my life. I'm going to flip through and say, oh, here's this one ritual that kind of does what I want. Let's give it a try. Right. Just start doing it. Yeah. Yes, be patient. And absolutely, you're going to trip over these words. You're going to trip over these barbarous words and divine names. Do your best.
Yeah, let's talk about that, though, because... Again, for me, it was your article on Digital Ambler that's like, oh, okay, so that actually sounds more like an umlaut. Like you go through each and every one of them. But getting the words right, is this important? Why is it important? And other than that, is it more about the sound of the words of these barbarous names than it is the actual semantic content of these things?
Oh God, this is such a terrible question. Oh my God. So in the Chaldean oracles, that very famous Neoplatonic text, there's a very famous line of, something along the lines of, don't change the divine names, don't change the barbarous words, where, they are meant to be there as they are. And that's all well and good.
Right.
If, for instance, you look at the tradition of Vedic mantras in Sanskrit in Hinduism, in the priestly tradition, and they are super stringent about pronouncing everything exactly correctly. There is only one proper way to pronounce them because it has cosmic influences, and you do it for this reason and this way. You change the intonation of that one tiny dot on that letter, and it becomes something completely different. I love that ethic. I love that process. And let's be honest, no, it doesn't work for us.
No.
I mean, how do you even begin to pronounce these words? For instance, when you're reading ancient Greek, there's different ways you pronounce it.
Yeah.
There's the so-called Reclinian pronunciation, which is just basically using modern Greek sounds.
Right.
So like a modern Greek speaker raised in Greece will use how they read modern Greek to read ancient Greek.
Right.
As if, there is no difference. You have the Erastian pronunciation, which is more 500 BC classical Athenian Greek.
Right.
You have Koine Greek, which was kind of a cross between the two. You have Byzantine Greek, which is another development. Each different stages of development of Greek language had a slightly different pronunciation system. They're all technically correct depending on your context and how you're trained. If you are natively Greek and were raised in Greece and are studying ancient Greek, you're going to read things in a modern Greek way. Right. And that's totally fine. If you were raised in America and studying ancient Greek, you're going to learn more of an Erastian pronunciation.
Right.
So they're right for individual context. There's no the one right way.
Right.
It's really a battlefield, especially along, some nativist Greek speakers who, say that, oh, the Erasmus pronunciation is wrong. Other Europeans who are not Greek are wrong. There's only one way to pronounce it. That's how I pronounce it. It's like, okay, that's fine. Whatever.
Right.
For me, I use a kind of blend of Koine Greek pronunciation with Coptic influences to kind of replicate how this stuff was actually spoken in this context of like 300 AD, in Greco-Roman Egypt.
Right.
As for the sounds, like they're written in a number of ways.
Yeah.
Like obviously these people were literate, but their notion of literacy is not our notion of literacy. We take the notion of a dictionary and standardized spelling completely for granted nowadays.
Yeah.
And you'll see like 10 different spellings of a single barbarous word that we can identify as the same barbarous word, but it's spelled 10 different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, are we going to pronounce it the same? Was it just people's, like, are they affecting it different ways? Who knows?
Right.
There's also a theory, not really a theory, it's probably more of an actual phenomenon, that my friend Michael Lux, brought up, that when you see these strings of vowels, you're not saying vowels, you're singing musical notes.
Yeah.
Because there's 7 vowels in the Greek alphabet, and we know for a fact they were referenced as these 7 notes of musical theory that were used by the ancient Egyptians who sang these pure sounds in hymns to the gods. Right. Even in modern Coptic Orthodox Christian services, they will draw out a single syllable for like 15 minutes in various intonations. It's so beautiful. Yeah. But it's like it'll make like a single recitation of Psalm 23 an hour long. Right. And that's just what they do. Yeah. And that's an actual survival of ancient Egyptian temple practices and probably how they sang their hymns. Right. So when you have these really long strings of vowels, yeah, you could very well say them as strings of vowels. Whatever. But you could also actually read them as musical notes and sing a hymn, sing these names lyrically and melodically. And I think that's also totally a valid, if not a more valid way of doing this. There's no one wrong way for this. There's lots of right. Well, let me rephrase that. There's no one right way. There are definitely wrong ways, but there's no one right way. Do what feels best for you. For me, I like using my Coptic Koine pronunciation, which sounds a little bit harsher than Koine, which personally I get a lot of mileage out of. And I've had some people try it out, and a lot of people also get a lot of mileage out of it. Some people don't. I'm not saying that I'm the only correct one, because God knows I'm wrong so many times. But it's a way I like using. Other people who have their systems that works for them, Godspeed. More power to you.
I think I find a way that helps me, and you list them in some of your pronunciation articles, is that a lot of the vowels themselves have animal attributions.
Yes.
That to me is incredibly helpful, so I can link up a sound to, and although it could be like a falcon,
howl like a baboon,
yes,
or
yeah,
like a falcon, yeah,
exactly. It's that to me is a great vector, and for me to try and understand the pronunciation almost a little bit better, and just it helps that much more. So when somebody cracks open the PGM and they start looking through things, they're going to see a lot of things in there like brains or semen of Hermes, or all of this kind of fun stuff. These are ingredients for certain things, and some of them that they're just code for another item that is like a plant or something like that. Again,
Maybe there's
yeah,
one tech.
yeah.
Yeah, there's one reference of things being coded as others, but in general, they didn't do that. It
Really?
was, if it said brains, it meant brains.
In a Patreon that I just Patreon episode I just did, one of the ingredients in there was blood of a black dog. I think it was from PDM Supplemental. Anyways,
Oh, yeah.
what does somebody do when they are crossed with a lot of these ingredients that they don't have? And you've got a series of articles about something like animal sacrifice and ways of not getting around that, but just trying to work with it. What can you say about these ingredients, especially with somebody who, might be a little bit iffy about such things, or that they can't procure certain items?
Well, and this same question you could ask of a Solomonic magician.
Right.
In the Key of Solomon, for consecrating the black-handled knife, it calls for the blood of a black cat.
Yeah.
For the white-handled knife, it calls for the blood of a gosling.
Right.
Like, what do you do in that case? Well, if you can, you get the blood of whatever's you get blood from. Like, so for, black-handled knife, get blood of a black cat. I'm not saying you need to kill a black cat. Like, please don't do that.
Right.
Unless it specifically says slay a black cat and collect its blood. Well, that's a different matter.
Yeah.
I mean, many of us have friends who are in the veterinary profession, and if you're in good with them, you can take your cat over to them, or if they have a black cat, just get a little tiny sample of blood from them. Boom, you're done. Totally ethical, totally humane, not a problem at all.
Right.
But like at the time when I consecrated my black-handled knife, I didn't have that available to me.
Right.
Like I didn't know anyone with a black cat who was willing to, let me take it to my vet friend to, draw a vial of blood.
Yeah.
So I did have a friend who did have a black cat though. And so I asked for some fur, some claw, shavings, some whiskers that fell out. I got enough of a black cat to get the resonance, the essence.
Got it.
I did have to work around that because it wasn't as powerful as blood. Mm-hmm. So if I could have gotten spit or maybe even urine, that'd have been great.
Yeah.
But I instead augmented it with a lot of other Saturnian elements because the black-handled knife is the weapon of Saturn from the Key of Solomon.
Right.
So I augmented it with wormwood and this, that, and the other, and myrrh, and it just felt disgusting. It ethereally felt disgusting. But that's kind of what I use as my black cat blood substitute.
Got it.
I did what I could to work my way around it. Sometimes you can just use an herbal solution. If you know what you're doing, kind of at a higher level what it is the black cat blood's supposed to be doing, you can kind of pick the right herbs to do so. Maybe mix some mineral elements in there as well. It's a substitution method is all it is. It's a substitute. And if you're good at what you're doing, it'll be identical in the end to what you originally should have had. If you're good at what you're doing. Otherwise, it's just going to be a substitute. You can tell when a fake meat burger is fake meat. You can tell. But there's some, we're getting better at it. People, there are companies who are making really good meat substitutes where you can't tell.
Right.
If you know what you're doing, you can make a substitute that is identical ethereally to the substance you're trying to have.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not just about the material.
Right.
Sometimes it's about the process itself. Sometimes the actual act of doing something like that is itself vital to the ritual. And this is large, for instance, drowning a cat in milk or something, or drowning a falcon in water. This is an important thing in some rituals. And why? Well, it's not just to be unnecessarily cruel to a falcon, but consider that in ancient Egypt, if you drowned in the Nile, you automatically became a god. Right. That's how the cult of Antinous started. Antinous died in the Nile. Yeah. And it wasn't just Hadrian's love for Antinous that made him a god. That's just what happens. You die in the Nile, you're a god.
You're a god.
So this act of drowning something in water is replicating that and elevating that animal spirit to become a god on your behalf for you to work with.
Right.
So this gets into some really touchy substance.
It does.
I don't want to drown a falcon. A, because I don't like killing things necessarily. B, falcons are terrifying. Can you imagine how much it's going to fight and struggle? Jesus, fuck, I'm not going to get my arm sliced open from a falcon talon. Fuck that. So, but in that case, I would recommend, getting a falcon statue, maybe making one from terracotta, right. Specifically a porous material that can soak up water to replicate the whole drowning aspect. Maybe using a couple of falcon bones or falcon feathers, maybe getting a falcon skull if you can get one from a taxidermist to kind of embody in that statue. So you can create a sort of spiritual falcon that you would then drown and give it a second death to elevate it. Like, that's a totally viable approach in my opinion.
100%.
So, I mean, do what you can.
You had in your on your website, I don't know if it was the Royal Ring of Abrasax, but you used cakes. And
Yeah. Yep. So that ritual for consecrate this one ring calls the sacrifice of like 3 pigeons, 3 roosters, and a goose or something like that.
Right.
Now, for me, like, I'm a priest in Lukumi, Centuria, and one of the things we're known for is animal sacrifice. Like, not that we do this. I'm not saying we do this all the time. We reserve it for very specific rituals in a very specific way that we do it as humane as we possibly can, like kosher halal butcher.
Right.
But for me, it's not an issue. Like, I don't have the stigma about it that a lot of people nowadays do, because a lot of people nowadays are separated from the act of butchery and animal slaughter. And bear in mind, like, most cases, if you're going to slaughter an animal, the gods get their share, then you eat the rest.
Correct. Yeah.
But a lot of people aren't okay with that.
No.
And a lot of traditions aren't okay with that. And so this notion of making animal cakes, I basically lifted from a Tibetan Buddhist practice where they make these sacrificial cakes in animal shapes, because this is a holdover from an earlier indigenous practice of making animal sacrifices to the native gods of Tibet. And when the Buddhists came in power, they encountered these same spirits, and they're like, yeah, so we can't do the whole animal sacrifice thing.
Right.
We're going to have to work something out.
Yeah.
We can do a symbolic sacrifice for you. That's as far as we can go.
Right.
We can't do anything else. And the spirit's like, well, that's all you can do. We'll take it, I guess. So instead of sacrificing an actual rooster, you make an effigy of a rooster and you sacrifice that instead. Yeah. It's a token. It's a substitute. And if you carry things through properly, use a chicken egg for the rooster cakes, use a pigeon egg for the pigeon cakes, and so forth. Right. So long as you make the substitute appropriately, it will be as good as the actual act itself if you do things right. But doing things to be as good, it takes a lot of work. That's the thing. I'm on Twitter with a lot of my astrological friends. Astro Twitter is a huge world into itself. Holy crap.
Yes, it is.
And a lot of them are big into electional magic.
Right.
And electional astrology is amazing. Yeah. You wait for the stars to align, you do a thing, and boom, you get explosive results. Great. Perfect. I don't have time for that. It's great to do that. And if an election comes up when I can get around to it, all the better. I will absolutely make use of it. Yeah. But more often than not, it's at 3:30 in the morning, and if I'm not asleep, I'm playing Final Fantasy 14.
There you go.
I don't have time for that. If I still need to do something, I won't wait for an election. If I can make use of one, I will. Yes. Otherwise, I'll work around it. I'll do a timing substitute. I'll use a planetary hour when that sign rises, and I'll throw more incense and yell more at it.
Right.
I will have to do more work, because if you're using the election, all that power is ready to go for you. Yeah. I have to build up more power in order to get to that same level. Same with these animal sacrifices. Animal sacrifice is a pretty damn powerful work, and it's not to be taken lightly or trivially by anyone.
Absolutely.
Ever.
No.
But if you're doing something of that same gravity, you have to build up to that same gravity.
Right.
And I think that gets overlooked. We talk about substituting for all these things. Yeah. Substitute what you have to. We don't have black bands of Isis anymore. We don't have Isis symbols. We can just snip a bit off the sacred cloak of Isis and just use it for our rituals. We don't have that anymore. We have to substitute. Yeah. But do the substitute right. Put as much as you can into it so that it really does become as good. That's what makes it a substitute, so I can stand in for the thing. Right. Otherwise, you're just kind of half-assing it, and it's if that's all you can do, it's all you can do. But do your best.
Absolutely. Something that people will come across, less so much in something like the Corpus Hermeticum, but it does get mentioned, is the idea of prayer. There is prayer in the PGM, and it's something that you are a bit of a, I'm going to say it just to wax your Corvette a little bit more, but you're a bit of a superstar as far as prayers. You just released a book called, and please correct my pronunciation, Preces Castri?
Preces Castri. I prefer the classical Latin pronunciation.
Okay, perfect.
Preces Castri.
Preces Castri. So when people get started in magic, the idea is that, prayer isn't really that magical. But I would disagree, and as would you. So let her
Oh
rip.
God.
Let her rip, Sam.
Fundamentally, all prayer is magical.
Yeah.
All magic is prayer.
Yeah.
Like, yes, there are some kinds of magic that aren't spoken, that aren't verbalized.
Right.
Energy work is a kind of magic and spiritual practice that doesn't require speech. Okay, sure, granted. But unless you're doing that kind of stuff explicitly, everything we do is based around speech. It's based around communication.
Right.
You know, when you're calling up a spirit, I just said it in the word, you're calling them up. You're using their name. You're communicating, hey, I want this spirit to appear before me. The whole Trithemian conjuration, drawing spirits into crystals, it's just so much a series of Christian prayers calling on God to send down a certain spirit if God so wills. Like, that's all it is.
Yeah.
Same with the Arbitel conjuration, same with the Kia Solomon conjuration.
Absolutely.
You're just calling on a certain power to show up. You're using your words. All these PGMs things, they're invocations, or evocations, how you want to define it. There are consecrations. You're using your words.
Right.
Either in the name of a deity or you're calling on a deity to do such and such for you. What is this if not prayer?
Yeah.
What is prayer? Prayer is us communing with divinity. Whether it's God or the gods, doesn't matter. Prayer is prayer. You're communing with divinity. You are putting them on their level and bringing them to your level. You are meeting in the middle, if not elevating yourself or bringing them down to the world. That is what communion is. It is becoming common with them. And that's what prayer is. So all this work of calling on divine powers to consecrate a rock or a ring or what have you, that's prayer.
Yeah.
All the Kia Solomon stuff, it's just prayer.
Yeah.
Yes, it might be prayer at a certain talisman, or it might be prayer for a wand to be blessed by God. But again, blessing is innately a prayer-based work.
Correct.
And you go back to ancient Egyptian stuff, it's all based in the power of the word, all based in the power of speech, of the true name. That's why Thoth was so important for magical works, because Thoth knew the words and names of everything, almost like on an Adamic level.
Right.
The original Adamic language. Thoth knew the names of everything. Thoth gave Isis the secret names with which she could resurrect Osiris.
Right.
It's the act of speech, putting our ideas and making a physical change in the world through the reverberations of the air. We talk about vibrations. Sure, we talk about vibrations all day. That's what speech is. That's what sound is.
Right.
And through otherwise arbitrary grunts, I can put any idea into your head. Giraffe pimp. You're thinking of that right now. Peanut butter. You're thinking of that right now. I'm putting a thought into your head. It's spooky as shit.
That's magic.
Literally, yes.
Yes.
So just as I'm putting thoughts into your head, I'm putting thoughts into the world.
Yeah.
I'm also encouraged that whenever you do magic, to make a physical change, get a job, get a lover, kick someone in your life, whatever, it needs to be accompanied by a physical component. You can't just hang out in the astral and just do stuff in the astral while doing nothing down here. It doesn't work like that so well, if at all. But at the very least, speaking things. Your breath, your speech, your tongue has power of itself. Use it.
Right.
So for me, prayer is fundamentally all the magic I do is prayer based, because I'm always speaking my shit into existence, and that is essentially prayer.
Sam's got some wonderful prayer books. There's the one he just released. I'm not going to butcher how to pronounce it again.
Preces Castri.
Preces Castri. But you also have the Vadimecium Cipriani.
The Vadimecum Cipriani, the Ciprianic handbook. Yeah.
Yes, they're just fantastic. And I agree 100%. And you come up with a lot of your prayers as well, which are really quite wonderful. And you've definitely nailed the prayer component towards magic, which I think not enough people talk about, truthfully. So when you go through certain things, specifically within the Greek Magical Papyri, say something like segments of the 8th hidden book of Moses or the 10th hidden book of Moses.
PGM 13, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Saying out loud, you will see just how weird it gets as you start to speak some of these things just out loud.
That's exactly so. Okay, so there's a really cool thing about this I want to bring up.
Yeah.
Julius Caesar.
Okay.
I know it sounds totally outro and totally absurd, but Julius Caesar, obviously populist dictator, jerk in so many ways, revolutionary in others, blah blah blah. Sure, he was considered so fucking weird so fucking weird by his contemporaries because when he read stuff, he read things silently, which to us nowadays is like, that's it.
Right.
Yeah, because we read stuff silently all the time, but back in the day, you didn't do that. No one did that, like because writing has always been considered a replication of speech. Nowadays, we have this well, intuitive, if not explicit, understanding that writing it's writing. It's
Right.
words on paper. I've written these things to be on paper. It's not a replication of speech. Back in the day, when you wrote a letter, your letter was supposed to replicate you actually saying those
Talking.
things to the
Right.
person.
Yeah.
So when you got a letter in ancient times, you read it out loud. That's what you did. That way you can kind of hear their words.
Right.
Julius Caesar didn't do that. He read stuff entirely internally, which other people just consider to be fucking spooky as shit.
Let's get him.
Eventually it did. Surprise.
Yeah.
So most people throughout history have always read things out aloud. When you're getting used to learning a language, you're going to read things out aloud because it helps you process it easier. So you have these stories in the medieval and Renaissance period of like, oh, well, I had a copy of Agrippa and I was reading it, and then weird shit started happening, and so I put it away, I burned it in a fire. Well, when we see accounts of this, we're like, but you're just reading Agrippa.
Right.
To us, that'd be reading it internally. They weren't reading it internally. They were reading these things out loud. So when you read like the Arbatel out loud, or you read the Kia Solomon out loud, you're saying all these prayers, you're saying all these spells and rituals out loud. Of course shit's gonna happen.
Yeah.
That's why these things were considered black books of the devil. Ooh, because people were reading out loud because that's just how you read.
Right.
So the power of speech, the power of actually saying these prayers, saying them is enough to get attention. So maybe it's a good thing that a lot of us are just reading internally, because it really does decrease the chances of things happening spookily.
Right. Give it a crack every once in a while. Like if somebody has the PGM and you haven't opened it up for a long period of time because you just thought it was a little bit odd, open up any of the books in there. Like you could even, I tend to go for the eighth hidden book of Moses, but there's some.
You're bold. You are braver than I am. Holy shit.
There's great stuff in there. I absolutely adore it. I gotta ask, and this is a pretty elementary school question, but I gotta ask it anyway, Sam. But do you have any favorite rites or spells or rituals from the PGM?
Oh God.
All of it.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
The stuff I put on my blog, basically, the stuff that I've like vetted and I've used in one degree or another for one purpose or another. So the stuff I put on my blog along those lines, stuff that I like. That's why I share them.
Yeah. Fantastic. Love it.
I mean, obviously, the headless rite is a good one. I love the invocations from PGM 13. The heptagram rite, which is actually only a small part of that whole encompassing ritual. There are a whole bunch of like for instance, so I've written Precus Castri, which is my more monotheistic Abrahamic prayer book. I'm working on also a Precus Templi prayer book, which is more polytheistic, more Greco-Egyptian. There are some monotheistic elements because the prayers that are in the Corpus Hermeticum and other Hermetic texts are largely monotheistic-ish, if not monolatric, depending on how you want to perceive it. Maybe henotheist, whatever. But I have a lot of prayers in there, for like the hymns to Hermes, the actual god Hermes, in the PGM. I have my own versions of that in my Precus Templi book. And so I'm working on that, and I'm going to put it out at some point. There are a lot of good rituals in there. Sometimes they're whole rituals. Sometimes it's just an invocation or the things you say. But there's a lot of dross in the PGM, not going to lie. Yeah. But there's also a lot of gems in there, or a lot of gems that just need to be dusted off.
Right. I believe it was your heptagram rite that when I first discovered it. And I have literally every day, or for the last 5 years, it's how I start my day. It's just acknowledging time. Time is very important to me. Now, I think we might as well throw this in here. If you have a copy of the PGM, you start going through it, you'll see a couple of things. One of them will be like, this has worked 6 times, or this has worked 8 times. You'll also see something else that says, add the usual. So,
oh, God.
Sam, what do you do when you add the usual?
Whatever I damn well feel like. So, again, it needs to be remembered that the PGM is a collection of individual priest magicians' own notes, Maybe they copied it from another source. Maybe it's just, them writing their own stuff down. And so they're saying, okay, for this specific purpose, I need to say XYZ, and then I'll fill in the rest with my usual process. A large number of us have a process that we typically do. Like when I do my morning prayers, I have a set method of how I do my prayers. I first I anoint myself with oil, I light my shrine lamp, I sit down and do my meditation, I'll say my certain prayers, in a certain order, I'll do some vowel intonation, planetary work, whatever, I'll finish up a certain way. That's my process. That's my usual. We don't know what the usual was for these magicians. They never wrote it down. For them, it was just, oh yeah, just do your thing, whatever you do.
Right.
Whatever, maybe it was something that they were taught that's part of their tradition of priesthood. Maybe it's literally, it could just be fill in the blank. I think fill in the blank is kind of the best way to go about it.
Right.
For instance, I think it's in PGM4. I don't know. PGM4 is massive. It's a very simple full moon invocation. That's all of 6 words.
Love it.
Actio pif eres kigal nebu suatalet satot sabo sabrot. You say that to the full moon and add the usual.
Right.
Like that. Like that's the whole thing.
Thanks,
full
guys.
moon. Like that's it. It's wonderful.
Right.
But what is the usual? So it literally could be whatever you want. For me, when I do that ritual, or just a simple invocation of the full moon, I will go outside with some jasmine incense or some violet incense or some sandalwood incense, maybe with off 3 glasses of one of water, one of wine, one of milk, maybe a bottle of honey to drizzle. I'll look at the full moon. I'll maybe say the Orphic hymn to the moon. I'll say these magical words a couple of times, make an offering of the incense, say the magical words again, make an offering of the wine, and so forth. I will build up a whole ritual.
Right.
That'll be my usual for that ritual. Maybe if I'm doing a different lunar work instead, still needs to be done around the full moon, I might also use these words, but in a different context. Who knows? Yeah. There's no real answer to add the usual, but it is a good joke to make amongst a lot of PGM magicians. Oh yeah, it's add the usual.
Add the usual.
Go a little. Like for chaos magicians, the joke is, chaos magicians just jack off over a sigil and that's into their magic. Like for them, that's add the usual.
There you go.
Get off over some paper, you're done.
That's it.
It's kind of gauche, but if it works for them, more power to them. That's their usual. Add the usual.
There you go. You have a framing rite on your website, which is it's interesting to actually even see. Do you still use the framing ritual for your stuff? Or
no.
You just, yeah.
God. So let me explain. I did come up with a whole PGM style framing rite, which is it's an honest god mishmash of a whole bunch of stuff from across the PGM,
all over the place,
and it's a framing ritual. So it's not a ritual unto itself. It's meant to set up a spiritual environment, a temple setting, to consecrate a space, to purify yourself, to make the initial offerings to the initial powers that be. And once that's all done, then you have completely prepared a whole space and a etheric atmosphere for what you do. So then you do the thing you're going to do. And then once you finish that, then you do a couple other things to wrap up the ritual in part of this framing rite. It builds a frame for your ritual.
Right.
I wrote it to be as elaborate as possible as a kind of best case, best practice scenario.
Right.
So for instance, if I were running an actual Hermetic temple, an actual Greco-Egyptian Hellenistic PGMs focused, aesthetic temple, that will be the whole process. Kind of like how if you're going to a Catholic church,
right,
and you want a special mass to be said, maybe a special mass to be said for the commemoration of someone's passing.
right.
The mass has a process. There's a rubric, a protocol for a mass to be said. They open this way, that something different happens based on what you're doing, and it closes this way. Right. That's kind of the intent of this framing ritual. It's a lot of work. And
it's a lot of work.
Like I am lazy. Like if I don't have to do something, I won't.
Right.
Like if I'm moved to do something, maybe I'll give it a try. Yeah. But that's a lot of work. If you have the time, if you have the focus to really build up a whole space like that on the routine, by all means have at. God bless. That's great work you can do. If you're building up a temple from scratch, right, that would be a great use of the framing rite. Like if you're out camping, yeah, and you need to do something out in the middle of the forest, as few tools as possible, that's what a framing rite is great for, because you're building a temple from scratch. But if you already have a temple set up in your house, that already has, wards set up and it's already been purified, it's already kept in a state of purity, you already make offerings there in the regular.
Right.
You don't need the framing right as much. You
Yeah.
might want something toned back. You might not need it at all.
Right.
But it won't hurt to do something like that, by all means.
Right.
But it's not as necessary if you're already operating on a level that's more or less kind of there.
If you already have a relationship with a lot of if you have deities or spirits that you already have something going for, if you've already built this up, I don't like the term build it up, but if you already have that, yeah, you don't need as much of, say, the oomph in there if you've already gone through that. But I'd say for people that are interested in PGM magic, give it a shot. I have, and it definitely does what Sam says it does. It adds it adds a whole. It's long. I'm just gonna say that.
I'm actually glad to hear you say that. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of stuff I write on my blog is a lot more hypothetical, theoretical, experimental than I might let on.
Right.
So like when people try it, I'm like, A, you're bold as shit. B, I applaud you. But like to hear you say that, like that makes me feel good about the stuff I do.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Oh, no worries. We're just coming to the end here, Sam, but I want this to get locked down for people. Why is Hermeticism or Hermetism, as well as Greco-Egyptian magic and the PGM, important for people to understand, not merely historically, but as far as the Western magical tradition?
That's a good question. I mean, in some ways, when you look at the PGM stuff, you really are looking at a grandfather, an ancestor of a lot of stuff we do nowadays.
Yeah.
Jake Stratton-Kent, we all know him. We all love and or hate him, depending on your perspective.
Right.
Like, I don't buy all of his theories, but he's brilliant, not going to lie.
Yeah.
And he does actually trace a large number of things from PGM era kind of practices.
Absolutely.
And yes, we do see echoes of PGM magic in even modern neo-pagan stuff that has no direct connection, but we still see echoes of it.
Yeah.
We still see the same underlying influences, the same underlying techniques from that era of magic that we see in hoodoo, for instance. That no, there's no direct connection, but we see the same basic human impulses, the same basic natural human perceptions of how shit magically works. We still see that in the PGM. So why is Hermeticism and PGM stuff important for us to keep studying, bear in mind? A, it's a great another toolbox for us to keep on hand.
Right.
B, it does give us more historical understanding of where do we come from, spiritually, magically, culturally. How have things developed? How have things evolved? And under what influences have they evolved?
Right.
That's as important to know as the sources themselves. So as far as the Western magical tradition, PGM is great to learn, just to learn it and to use it, but also to see how have our own practices been shaped by the millennia that have intervened between the magicians of today and the magicians of then.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up Jake's work because I think it's in the True Grimoire, the one about the Grimoire Verum. He has a chapter there, and he goes through how a rite within the PGM in which you ask Anubis to bring spirits to a table and sit and dine with them and to bring in other spirits. And we see this also in other texts hundreds and hundreds, more than 1,000 years later, from things through fingernail scrying, which I don't see a lot of people doing these days, but they're actually in there. That goes through things like the hygromantia and whatnot. But absolutely, it is a document to see, and I'm not going to disagree, but not just to see how things have changed, but how much, as you mentioned earlier, how things have stayed the same.
Yes. Like for another good example, I've been researching this one ancient Akkadian, Mesopotamian ritual called the Maklu.
Okay.
The burning is what it literally means. And it's a very aristocratic anti-witchcraft ritual.
Okay.
And it's like, it takes place over the course of an entire night. It's a long ritual, and it's pretty thorough. Some parts you need adaptation because like you can't anoint the gateway to your property because most people don't have gateways to their property.
Right.
But back then it's just a thing. Like you had a villa, you had a lintel for going into the grounds. But like, it references like footprint magic, like catching someone's footprint, hoodoo and Congo shit. Like that's like I was caught off guard by like any witchcraft that was done by catching someone's footprint, or if someone walked over something and caught their essence, like I recognize that.
Right.
Holy shit. It's like we do see so many of the same things over and over again throughout time. Sometimes it is a survival.
Right.
Sometimes, though, it's not. It's just an independent development of the same thing. And it's fascinating to see that when it happens.
Absolutely. I love it. It's beyond explanation. It's so fascinating that how people can come at magic and find they get to the same destination, but by a totally different journey. And it's so wonderful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love it to death. Sam, I gotta ask, because you do a lot of work, man. I don't know how you have as much time in the day to do so much stuff, but what's next for Sam Block and for Polyphanes? What's next, man? You know what? Everybody asks you about the geomancy book, but man, if I could have two things from you, and this is by no means any kind of pressure, but one is there's got to be a PGM book somewhere in you. Somewhere within you, there's got to be something. But another thing, man, if you would be able to go to a publishing company and you have a little check mark of all of your articles, and you're allowed to pick 15 of your blog posts and they'll put it in book form, I think that would be an amazing thing, because some of your stuff I have to read over and over and over again because it's nuanced and it's brilliant. But yes, that's just a weird way of asking you, what do you got next, man? You do so much.
Shit, I don't even know. Not versus Rumble or anything. This has been a rough year for everyone.
No doubt.
You know, for obvious reasons we don't need to say at this point. We all know.
Yeah.
And like, it's rough for me too. Like, it's all I can do to keep my head above water. And I'm in a pretty fortunate situation. Right. So like, I'm just kind of taking this time just to like ease up on myself in general and just kind of relax and just stew with myself, soak in information, and just kind of just be with myself. That's kind of my main thing right now. Yeah. I do have some writing projects lined up that I'm chewing at and nibbling at from time to time, but nothing too concrete yet. Obviously, there's the precise simply thing I want to put out in the near future, but we'll see when I get to that. Like, I have my Domino fortune telling book that I want to actually submit for publication at some point. There's my Geomancy book I'm still writing on, as ever. So I mean, it's not like I don't have projects to do, but it's like, maybe I was going to nap until January. Who knows?
As I've said to a couple of people, we're all in the penalty box right now. It's time for us to just take a look at that scoreboard and see exactly where we stand to get back in the game and play a little bit better.
It's true. Like, honestly, more people just need to sit back and relax as much as they can right now. Like,
I think so.
Life is not easy right now. Life has never been easy. Let's be honest. Life has always been difficult for some more than others. Right. Difficult for more than some, I suppose. If you're struggling right now, just take it easy. Forgive yourself. Like, I struggle with this. I feel a lot of guilt over myself for really no goddamn good reason. Like, oh, I'm not doing enough. Oh, I should be doing more. Yeah, no. Like, it's okay to take things easy once in a while. Yeah. There will be times to work. There will be times to be active. Maybe this isn't one of them for a lot of people.
No.
We are going through some pretty awful astro weather right now. Yeah. And while may have passed the worst peak periods of it, or not, depending on what you look at the next coming weeks.
Right.
Things aren't really going to be good until like 2023. Like, let's be honest. It's like, if things just feel bad, it's okay to feel bad. Do what you can to get by and just fortify yourself.
Right.
You don't have to go to a gym every day to fortify yourself, whether literally or metaphorically. If it's just spending some more time napping because you're constantly so stressed over everything going on, then take more naps. It's fine. If you need to make a couple of cakes and then eat them, make some cakes and eat them. It's okay.
Yep.
Like, nothing matters anymore. There is no times. I mean, why not?
Absolutely.
Not to be nihilist about anything, but like, this is a rough time. Forgive yourself and take it easy for not just for myself, but for everyone. Like,
exactly.
There are times to work. Maybe this isn't one of them.
I've said it on somebody else's podcast, but now is the time to be kind, not just to yourself, but to just absolutely everybody. We just got to be all kinds of kind, really, and just take it easy. Sam, where can people find your work?
So my blog is the primary way you can find my work. Digital Ambler, so https://digitalambler.com. I have a Facebook profile, which is nice and all, whatever. I'm on Twitter, where it's hilarious and stupid, and I shitpost all the time, as is the custom. And that's basically where you find me. I have an Etsy account. I have a Ko-fi account. So if you want to buy my stuff or get readings from me, those ways you can do it. Just go to my website, digitalambler.com. You'll find everything you need.
Perfect. And as I've said, people, it is literally, in my opinion, the greatest free source of information that you can get, not just starting out in magic, but when you're well on your journey, there's always something to learn. There is a humbleness to the way that Sam tells his stories through both the things that he's going through and the texts that he's reading. That is so refreshing in this day and age that I think that everybody needs to go to Sam's site. And I'll continue linking to it because Sam's got something about absolutely everything. And when I did my necromancy episode, it's like, I know Sam's definitely done some work with Talking to the Dead. Let's have a look. Bam, there it is. And it's some really good advice. So
Thank you.
Please, everybody, check out thedigitalambler.com. A link to Sam's blog will be up on whatmagicisthis.com under the show notes. For each and every show, I do a ton of show notes. A lot of what Sam and I have been talking about today will be up on there, so please check them out. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, there you can find a link for how to subscribe to the show on iTunes and on Spotify. If they have podcasts, I'm going to be listed, guys, so please check that out for sure. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, you can find a link to my Twitter account where I am friends with Sam. We have some interesting conversations every once in a while. It's always great to check that out. Also, you can find my Instagram link as well as a link to Facebook. I'm all up in the social media these days. Anyways, also, if you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review where you can. On iTunes is best preferred, but I think Stitcher, you can also leave a review on there as well. Also, if you enjoy the show, tell a friend. Tell a friend. Maybe they'll like the show as much as you do, and sharing is caring, so that's great. What could be better than that? Just sharing your love of magic with somebody else who hopefully will start a love of magic. I just about 2 months ago started a Patreon account. Now, the Patreon account has been fantastic. I've got just shy of 100 followers at this point in mid-November. So if you need a bit more extra content, you just can't get enough of this show, I've been putting up some exclusive material there. There's videos on there as well where I go through certain magical processes, such as setting up an ancestral altar. I just put up an episode up there about how I start to find targets for enchantment, which has been well received, truthfully, and there's much more of that stuff to come. So yeah, if you want to support the show, Patreon. What magic is this? Please, it's only $7 a month. That's not very much. That's like a couple of coffees these days. And yeah, please support the work, not just for this main podcast, but for the exclusive material that you will find there. Did this show mean as much to you as, say, a video rental did back in 1993? Well, then you're welcome to throw some money my way. On my webpage, whatmagicisthis.com, I've got a little PayPal me link, just 2 P's. They're kind of like put over each other. Just click that link and yeah, you can send me anything from 50 cents to $50 to $50,000. How about that? It would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit counts, especially in this day and age. Sam, that's it, man. You made it to the end of this. Thank you so much for taking.
This is great. Like, oh, we talked for only 2 hours. Like, it's only 2 hours. Like,
I know.
Thank you again for having me. It's been great talking to you about all this, and thank you again for all the amazing work you do constantly for bringing more life for everyone. Thank you.
Oh, Sam, no, it's just what we have to do. Truthfully, there's not enough good people involved. There's a whole lot of egos and a whole lot of other stuff, and I just
Amen.
I just want to share. Truthfully, that's really it. So, Sam, I hope if I was to ask you to come on the show, you would sometime in the future. But for now, take it easy, relax, be good to yourself. And
goddamn, you too.
I certainly will. Sam, thank you again, and thank you everybody for listening to this show. Come on back to What Magic Is This? We're going to talk about a bit more of this strange, weird, crazy, awesome magic stuff. Until then, I want you all to stay healthy, stay hopeful, and stay luminous. We'll talk at you soon. Bye-bye, everybody.